Oh man, we're actually doing it. We're covering a golf game. I've been rewatching Crontendo and Cron Turbo lately, and I'm amazed at how many golf games get released for home consoles over the years. It just seems so unnecessary. But there's something to be said about being the first in your field, so I present to you PGA Tour 96, the first of 4 golf games that hit the PlayStation in its first year of release in North America. This one's probably the most interesting of the bunch. The PGA Tour in the title refers to a championship series hosted by the Professional Golfers Association that dates back to 1929. It's the biggest organization of its kind, and many of the world's best-known golfers are PGA Tour players. The PGA Tour also licensed its name to a series of golf games published by Electronic Arts, starting with 1991's PGA Tour Golf for MS-DOS and the Sega Genesis. Now, there was no shortage of golf games at the time, but this one actually stood out from the crowd. PGA Tour Golf was one of the first golf games to attempt a sort of televised presentation, with 3D flyovers and reverse-angle camera views that show where shots land. There's also a putting green contour map that renders the terrain in front of you in 3D. It's a pretty complex game for its time, and even the Genesis version came packed with a 70-page manual. One thing that made PGA Tour Golf so successful was that it played at a very brisk pace. Thanks to the game's flat-shaded polygonal presentation, it didn't take very long to redraw the background after each shot, something that was often an issue with early golfing sims. Looking at it now, it's pretty low-poly stuff, but keep in mind that this was running on Sega Genesis hardware back in 1991, without the need for extra processor chips or anything. PGA Tour Golf and its sequels, PGA Tour Golf 2, 3, and European Tour, were created by Sterling Silver Software. Studio co-founders Lee Achter and Dennis Coble designed and programmed every game in the series during the 16-bit era. Around that time, Sterling Silver also produced Sega Genesis ports of polygonal Atari arcade games like Hard Drivin' and Steel Talons. Later, the studio was renamed Poly Games, reflecting its expertise with 3D graphics. So, given that these guys had a pretty good eye for technical artistry and could produce sharp polygonal graphics on 16-bit hardware, they could probably cook up some pretty impressive stuff for the PlayStation, right? Well, as it turns out, neither Achter nor Coble had anything to do with the making of PGA Tour 96. Years afterward, in a digital press interview, Lee Achter revealed that EA shifted series development in-house after the release of PGA Tour Golf 3, and basically just told the series creators to take a hike. That sounds like a pretty crappy thing to do from where I'm sitting, especially considering that Achter and Coble's technical know-how made the series as popular as it was in the first place. Achter later quit game development to focus on composing music, and Coble now works as a video game industry consultant. With the recent departure of its creators, you can think of PGA Tour 96 as a new beginning for the series. It's a collaboration between High Score Productions and Hitman Productions, 2 internal divisions at EA. At the time, High Score Productions had recently wrapped up work on Madden NFL 95 and NHL 95 for 16-bit consoles, and there was a lot riding on the studio's 32-bit debut. PGA Tour 96 introduces a new swing meter that's functionally identical to the mechanics from previous games, but it's much tougher to master. You set the power and angle of your shot using the same 3-press control scheme that's common to the genre, but there's a huge delay between when you push the button and when the game actually registers your input. Basically, you need to push the button way earlier than you'd think you should.
This fairly small putt should be straight in.
Until you get comfortable with the laggy control scheme, you're going to make a lot of bad shots, since missing the final press of the 3-click swing makes your ball veer sharply to the left or right, often driving it out of bounds. The difficulty involved in making shots stands out as a sticking point, since otherwise PGA Tour 96 is streamlined and simplified compared to previous games in the series. You no longer have to jump to a separate screen to get a close look at terrain elevation when you're on the putting green, and you can easily set your targeted distance for each shot by setting a custom marker on the swing meter. Once you learn how the timing works, shots are overall much more predictable than they were in earlier PGA Tour games. PGA Tour 96 doesn't just scale things back in terms of mechanics either. There are only 2 courses to choose from, compared to the 8 courses in PGA Tour Golf 3 for the Sega Genesis. As a trade-off, I guess, all the featured holes have narrated flyby sequences.
This intimidating par 3 is named Skeleton Island.
And each golfer has his own cheesy introduction video ripped from a late-generation VHS tape. At least there's some pretty good clips in here. What are you even doing, Stadler? Get out from under there! Have some dignity, for God's sake! All of this is dancing around the obvious question, though. Where's Madden? PGA Tour Golf is one of EA's biggest sports franchises, of course, but the John Madden football series is what really made the company what it is today. And while the back of PGA Tour 96's manual claimed that a PlayStation version of Madden NFL 96 was coming soon, the game never actually hit retail. What gives? Well, that's an interesting story. Turns out that Madden 96 was actually being developed for the PlayStation alongside 16-bit console versions, and a beta version leaked years after the fact reveals that the game wasn't exactly up to standards by the time EA pulled the plug. The PS1 version of Madden NFL 96 was developed by High Score in a co-production with Visual Concepts, who would later give the Madden franchise its first serious competition with the NFL 2K series. Back in 1995 though, yikes. This isn't looking good. Now, granted, the leaked beta doesn't reflect what the final game would have looked like if it had been given a few more months of polish, but annual sports franchises like EA's tend to have strict deadlines, since sequels need to be released during seasonal play. Given that this beta is dated October 25th, and the 16-bit versions of Madden 96 were due to hit retail in November, yeah, it wasn't happening. And that's why EA's PlayStation debut was a golfing sim, and not the 32-bit Madden sequel everyone was expecting. We'll revisit Madden 96 in a few episodes when it's time to cover Sony's own NFL Game Day. So, while the PS1 version of Madden 96 never made it to retail, its cancellation allowed High Score Productions to focus on finishing up PGA Tour 96, which turned out nicely in comparison. A refined sequel was released for the PlayStation and Sega Saturn in 1996, and a couple years after that, EA hit pay dirt when it signed a licensing deal with an up-and-coming golfer named Tiger Woods. That's not to say that PGA Tour 96 had a lack of star power with its 10 featured professional tour players, but Craig the Walrus Stadler doesn't draw crowds like Tiger does. Man, I'm sorry, Stadler. Hey, we'll always have Pebble Beach. Right? What are you doing? Get out from under there! Come on, Stadler. Jeez. Now that we're done here, next up is Off-World Interceptor Extreme, the second PlayStation game from Crystal Dynamics. Ugh, hope it's better than Total Eclipse Turbo. We've got some pretty big releases coming up in the next few episodes, so if you enjoy this series, tell your friends. Things are about to get very interesting in the world of PlayStation as the holiday season of 1995 approaches. We'll see you next time.